Hello, YouTube. This is Mike, and this is the four things that heal BPD and NPD abuse. And today we're going to be talking about Ross Rosenberg's method of codependency recovery, his book called The Human Magnet Syndrome. People have asked me about that. I got a couple of back to back requests. What do I think of the human magnet syndrome? Have I read the book? And specifically, there was a very good question because somebody was confused because I had said in my most recent video that borderlines are codependents. And this person said, that's confusing me because I've read Ross Rosenberg's book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, which apparently is extremely popular. I had never heard of it until then. I had briefly skimmed through Ross Rosenberg's videos a couple times years ago, but in any case, this person was confused because Ross Rosenberg says there are two kinds of people in these relationships. There is the narcissist, the abusive narcissist, and then there is the passive codependent. So for me to say that borderlines are codependent, this was confusing to him because how could the narcissistic abusive borderline also be a codependent? Because in these relationships, there's one abuser and one codependent victim. So I have talked about that a lot. So keep your ears open and maybe watch some more videos because I will talk about it. But I can understand your confusion, and so they're asking me, what do you think of Ross Rosenberg's idea? Because anyway, it's very popular. So what I'm going to do in this video is we are going to listen to Mr. Ross Rosenberg talk about his method and talk about, this is going way back, what got him started on what he calls the codependent dance. And I'm going to give you my take on it. So before we do that, let me just tell you, this channel is called The Four Things That Heal BPD and NPD Abuse. Those four things very quickly are: number one, you go complete no contact. You make it impossible for them to contact you for the rest of your life. That is your commitment. Number one, you go complete no contact. Number two, you work all 12 steps. And the easiest one is Codependence Anonymous. You can go to coda.org and work the 12 steps. You must work the 12 steps with a sponsor, especially the fourth step, meaning looking at your resentments, your anger. And then the third one is not mandatory, working with a psychologist. I'll explain why the third one is not always by itself healing. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, in this video. And number four is to have some kind of meditative practice. So the four things are: you go no contact, you work all 12 steps with a sponsor, you work with a psychologist, and you have some kind of meditative practice. The first two are non-negotiable. In my experience, if you don't do thing one and two, in my experience and in my observation, you may not ever completely recover from the trauma of that relationship. If you do number one and number two, in my experience, you will eventually completely, totally heal from that relationship. You'll never even think about it again if you don't want. And if you want to prove me wrong, then I dare you to do one and two completely and fully, and then come back a year later and tell me I didn't do anything. So far, nobody has said that. All right, so am I misunderstanding this idea? Ross Rosenberg says that in these dynamics, there are two kinds of people. There is the passive codependent victim, and then there is the narcissistic abusive narcissist. So there's only these two, and you're either one of these two in this dynamic. And I say that all of them are codependent, that the non-disordered passive victim is a codependent, obviously. The borderline is a codependent, even when they're in the abusive role, even when they're splitting and in their psychopathic secondary self state, even then they are a codependent. And the full-on psychopathic NPD narcissist in their most horrific, even when they're killing people, like a serial killer, even they are codependents. How can I say that when Ross Rosenberg, a psychotherapist, psychologist, a very successful author and psychologist, he says you're either the passive codependent victim or you are the abusive narcissist. I will explain that, but what I'm going to do is we're going to listen to Ross Rosenberg talk about, this is way back in, looks like 2013, and he is talking about how he started coming to this understanding. And I am going to stop during his speech, and I will give you my editorial comments. So let's just go ahead and get into it. This is Ross Rosenberg explaining the beginnings of his human magnet syndrome relationship dynamic. All right, so here we go.
After about 15 years in the field, I kept wondering, why do these codependents keep going back to the same person? Or why, when they break up, do they find another person who is a different person in that a different face, maybe a slightly different personality, but they are the same, have the same psychological background? Why did my codependent clients keep going back to these emotional manipulators?
Okay, so right there, let me just stop in. So, to be clear, he is saying that he has had a practice for a long time as a psychologist working with codependents. And he was saying that this was an issue, that his clients, plural, seemed to be continuously going back. So they were going to therapy, they were working with him, and he was doing whatever he was doing to help them, but they were still going back and reinfecting themselves with these narcissistic partners. So you have to ask the question, what is going on in the therapy? Why is the therapy not doing anything? Just to let you know, that's why I say number 3 of the 4 things, work with a psychologist. That is not initially mandatory, because in my experience, psychology by itself doesn't solve the problem. I'm talking from personal experience. I have been in 12-step work for 40 years. I have been in therapy for 25 plus years. We're talking, regular therapy, group therapy, and it's been done wonders. It's been extremely, incredibly beneficial for my healing. But what I found is that in the case of codependence, if you aren't working the 12 steps, then all that therapy does at best is it pries open your unconscious, and you get to go, yeah, that's my mother, and I did that, and I don't love myself, and you become aware of what's going on in your unconscious, but it doesn't give you the ability to change. And that's what he's talking about here. What he's saying is that he had clients, and he was therapizing them, and he was wondering why they weren't getting better. Why were they going back continuously, repeatedly, according to him, going back and still getting involved in relationships with abusive, narcissistic people. All right, so that's another reason why I say therapy is strongly suggested, but after you've done thing 1 and thing 2. And even without therapy, if you do thing 1 and thing 2, you can still heal completely. All right, let's keep going. What does he have to say?
Over time, I came up with this idea that there was, and it was a metaphor, and I love using metaphors. It's as if 2 people found each other because they fit perfectly in their personality. It was like a dance. A dance, as we know, someone leads, right? And someone follows. A good dance is very well coordinated because the leader knows exactly what he's doing and the follower knows exactly what she is doing.
Okay, so he's going to get into it, but just very briefly, I'm going to say what he's setting you up for. First, when it comes to critical thinking, if anybody knows, I am a big fan of critical thinking. Critical thinking follows very specific guidelines, and it's very helpful because it allows you to learn the truth of a situation without letting your personal emotional attachments blind you or the personal emotional attachments of somebody else. But you also learn to have a skill, which is when somebody is giving you an assumption that will color the entire argument, you be able to see it before it goes anywhere. Now, Ross Rosenberg is doing that. He is giving an assumption here, and he's pretty clear about it. But if you go along with his assumption, then his conclusions will make sense. But if you don't necessarily accept the assumption, then you can critically analyze his conclusions. So the thing about assumptions are, if you start with a base assumption that is inaccurate or incomplete, it means every conclusion you come to will also be inaccurate or incomplete. More importantly, if the assumption that is being presented to you appeals to your emotional attachments, in this case, we're talking about psychology and we're talking about defense mechanisms. So I'm saying that Ross Rosenberg is introducing an assumption that already appeals to codependents' defense mechanisms, and they have an emotional attachment. So you're going to feel comforted just by the description of it. And the description of it is not a proven truth. And his assumption here is that codependence is a dance, and that one of them is a leader and the other is a follower. And for the codependent mind, they automatically feel like a passive victim. So when somebody says that these relationships are like a dance where one person leads and the other person follows, the codependent says, yes, that's right, I am the follower. And it's not necessarily because it's true, but it's because what it is emotionally how they feel about it. But he is giving this assumption as a fact. All right? And so anyway, I have more to say, but just be aware of that assumption. He's just introducing that assumption. You don't have to accept that assumption as true, but it is good to go, wow, that sounds really emotionally comforting to me. And are we looking to be comforted, or are we looking to find healing? All right, let's keep going.
Could be vice versa with gender. And when we have a perfectly matched couple, we have a perfect dance couple that can win any dance award possible. So I started to use this metaphor, dancing, the codependent being the passive, and the narcissist or the emotional manipulator being the active, or the active or controlling dance partner. And
that is an assumption. He's again giving you an assumption, and he just said he's explaining to you the assumption. And you know, he's a therapist, he's a degreed psychologist, and so you just automatically accept that, especially since it plays to your emotional experience. But as a critical thinker, I go, well, is that true? Is that true that the codependent is only this passive recipient of the dominant, controlling, and confident? This is important to him. He's going to portray the narcissist as a confident, stable, self-empowered controller. And that is an experience of the codependent. Does that mean it's true? Let's keep going.
Clients started to get it. They started to get that they're involved in these relationships that feel good, that feel right, but they have to submit to someone who's controlling. And once the light bulbs go off in our therapy sessions, that's when we have opportunities to really reach our clients. So over time, I developed this metaphor, and it turned into an essay. And I'm going to read you the essay in a minute. But the essay was the very beginning of the seminar. It was the first step for me to turn this idea into something tangible and concrete, from which I would build and eventually write a seminar based upon codependency and codependence and narcissists.
Okay, so let me just give a little background here about Ross Rosenberg. Based on what I've seen, some other, at least one other interview, he himself was in a relationship with a borderline. And he came up with this. There's another video where he talks about this method of dealing with narcissists, where it's basically you absorb, I don't know what it is, but it's some way of absorbing what is happening without reacting. And the thing that bothers me about that is that the assumption there is that you don't leave the narcissist. He gives people strategies to stay with a narcissist and absorb their abuse, apparently without letting it affect you. And my first thought is, why the hell are you even there? Get the hell out. You know, I understand that for some people it's difficult, but look, this guy is a codependent. He's admittedly a codependent. And as I've said, you know, codependents don't always find complete recovery. So I have doubts, just based on the way he talks about how to interact with a narcissist. My first response is, yeah, here's how you interact with a narcissist. You get the hell away from them. You go completely no contact. And the only reasons that you can't do that is if you're a 10-year-old kid and you have to stay living at home with your narcissistic parents. If you're an adult, there's no reason why you can't completely go no contact. I'm not saying it's easy. You're married, great. You get a lawyer. You make sure that your wife or your husband, ex-wife or husband, only communicates to you through your lawyer. You have kids, great. Same thing. You get a lawyer. You get a lawyer, and the lawyer does the negotiating for you. You have to, if you're not able to get full custody of your kids, then you let the lawyer negotiate the times for visitation. There's just no reason to stay in a relationship and learn how to absorb somebody's narcissism. I mean, if it's a short-term thing, like you're in a bus station or something and somebody's being abusive, great. But if we're talking about an excuse to stay in a relationship, so even that bothers me. That he's not coming out and saying, listen, this is a no-go situation, you got to get the hell out. Maybe he does later on in the book. I didn't read it. I'm just going off of what he says. But this is my uneducated personal reaction to him. He strikes me as a codependent who does not have complete recovery. I've got other reasons for that. Maybe we'll get to that. But anyway, let's keep going. Now he's going to get to his essay, which I believe is the basis of his book. And anyway, we'll get to that. Let's go.
Was a big step for me personally and professionally, because once I can recognize a process or a pattern, that is when we can make a difference with our clients. But we can listen all day and be sympathetic and empathetic, which is a very important part of psychotherapy. But if we can't identify the patterns and dig deep between the unconscious motivations, it's difficult to help our clients grow beyond their dysfunctional patterns. So here is the abbreviated essay, and it's available on my blog, and at the very end of the essay is the URL if you want to see it in its entirety. Codependency, the dance, or it's also called Codependency, Don't Dance. It depends on where it's written. I haven't picked I'm still struggling with the title that I want. The codependency dance requires two people, the pleaser or fixer, and the taker or controller.
Again, that's an assumption. The pleaser or fixer, the taker or controller. This is definitely our experience, but it is a blanket assumption. And it's a very comforting blanket assumption. But he doesn't address that. He doesn't address. He just submits it there to you. Listen. I don't get me wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with this guy. I think he's sincere. I believe that he really wants to achieve healing for himself and his clients. But what I'm saying is, I don't think he's aware of his emotional attachment to. Look, what he's just described. This is superficial. It is. It's a caricature. It's a cartoon. It's simplistic. And it's everything that psychotherapy is not supposed to be. Going in and looking at the, what causes the unconscious motivations. This isn't done by taking blanket cotton candy, superficial generalizations that comfort the person but don't really give them any real self-awareness. So the only self-awareness that he's offering to the codependent is that you are the passive victim. And your abuser is this controlling abuser that takes control. And you are caught in their web of control, which of course is your experience. But there's no effort I see on his part to look at what is the responsibility of the codependent. There's not even any addressing of how it is that the codependent seeks out these people. He says, I couldn't understand why my clients kept on falling for these abusive people over and over again. What was going on? And he's not really acknowledging that there is an active participation on the side of the codependent who is actually seeking out, on an unconscious level, seeking out these relationships, that they are actively involved. He makes it sound like, as I jokingly say, you're walking along the sidewalk and you step in a bear trap. Oops, I just stepped in a bear trap. No, what he says is true, that he has clients who know what these people are like, they keep going back to them. This is an unconscious choice. So right from the beginning, he's glossing over it. And what I'm seeing here is a projection. He himself is a codependent who has sought to recover. Based on what I've heard, I don't know that he has worked any of the 12 steps. In some of his interviews, he actually doesn't like the word codependent, and he seeks to talk about having a complete cure. So as I say, I teach you how to be cured from the pain of the relationship, but I don't promise that if you follow the four things, which of course I didn't make up, if you follow the four things, I don't tell you that you will be cured of your codependence. But you can be cured of the pain of that relationship, and you can avoid being in one for the rest of your life. But in any case, let's get back to him. We'll keep talking about it.
Dysfunctional dance occurs when one partner is a codependent and the other a narcissist or an addict. Codependents usually do not know how to emotionally disconnect or avoid significant relationships with individuals who are selfish.
Listen to the verbiage there. They don't know how to avoid. Again, it gives the assumption that these narcissists are unavoidable, that you're just going through life. I'm trying to avoid them, but I can't. He's not addressing their unconscious participation. Not only are they not able to avoid it, they're not able to stop seeking it out.
And harmful to them. They habitually enter into relationships with a partner who perfectly matches with their relationship pattern or dance style. Codependents are naturally the followers in the relationship dance.
That's just not true. That again, pure assumption. Codependents are naturally the followers. That is an assumption, that is your experience, but it's not true. And look, I don't like it either. I would much rather just allow this understanding to be true. I'm like you. I want somebody to tell me that they did it to me. I want to hear that. It makes me feel better. It gives me a space so that I can now separate and blame them, and it allows me to have my pain, my anger, my sadness, but it doesn't bring recovery. Because in my experience, the only thing that brings recovery is the awareness that you yourself were also manipulative. You were also controlling. You were also abusive. And that you are an equal partner in the co-abuse. This one-sided thing of you're the passive victim, you can't avoid them. I don't have the strength to avoid their he talks about them being confident. That is a projection. They are not confident. Abusers are not confident at all. They are incredibly insecure. In fact, their abuse comes from their massive insecurity. But this goes with the super empath. Basically, this book is the psychological version of super empath. And when I was on my channel, doing a live stream, a super empath showed up and said, there are two kinds of people in this world. There are empaths and there are narcissists. And so that's it. And you're either an empath, which means you love, and the more loving you are, the more empath you are. And the less loving you are, the more narcissist you are. And I said, no, that is not at all what happens here. People who get involved and stay with narcissistic abusers, they themselves are also narcissistic. They themselves are also extremely controlling. So this idea that the abuser is the only one controlling here is absolutely wrong. And you may not realize it. I didn't either, but I do now. And I'm talking about myself. If you think that I'm pointing fingers at you and I'm standing in my ivory tower, I'm not. I am talking about myself as well. So when you fall madly in love with your abusive partner, and as he puts it, you become the fixer, you become the perfect fixer, you become the perfect attendant, that is not passive. That is very active. And it comes from your narcissistic need to be seen as perfect, the perfect healer, the perfect fixer. And your goal for fixing is to get them to love you. You are doing the same thing in a different way. It is a dance, but you are doing the same thing in a different way that the narcissist or the borderline is doing. What you are doing is you are seeking to make yourself indispensable to the narcissist. When you become the perfect fixer, that is a strategy. And the strategy comes from, and here let me give you my definition of codependence. My definition of codependence, the reason why passive codependence, borderlines, and narcissists are all codependent, is because codependence is something that occurs during childhood where the infant and or the toddler gets the message that their value, their lovability comes from what they do, not from who they are. So you can be codependent and your lovability comes from being the best actor in the world, Will Smith. It comes from being the most powerful manipulator in the world, narcissist. It comes from being the perfect fixer. So at some point in time, those of us who are the non-disordered passive codependents, quote unquote, what happened is we got the message that in order to be loved, we had to perfectly fix other people's emotional problems. We aren't lovable if we can't fix you. Codependents look for the broken people to fix, because if they don't get any narcissistic supply. So we talk about the narcissistic supply of the narcissist and the borderline, but the codependent has a narcissistic supply also. They get narcissistic supply from being the healer. And there's a strategy. You are healing them. You are putting up with all of the abuse over and over and over again, as long as you're given the opportunity to fix them. Because you are waiting for that opportunity. When you finally can fix them once and for all, they will allow themselves to be loved. They will then reward you and they will say, finally, you did it. Somebody fixed me. I now can love you. You are doing it selfishly. You're not doing it unselfishly. And again, I'm talking from my experience. I can remember during the relationship and shortly after, I went no contact. I can remember weeping, tears pouring over my eyeballs, because if only she would let me love her. And the thought of how sad that she can't be loved. If she would just let me love her, and if I could just finally be the one. That was important. I didn't want her to find love. It wasn't like, I hope she finds love with somebody. No, I wanted her to find love with me. I wanted to be the one. And when she would say, you're the best one, you're the perfect one, nobody's ever done what you're doing, I would say, yes, that's right. I'm the only one. You will never find love except with me. And you see this all the time with the how to fix, how to put the narcissist in their place, super empath channel. And they'll, these ridiculous videos of when the narcissist realize they've lost you, when they realize they've lost the one, and you were the one, and when they realize that they lost you, that they'll never find love. It's pure projection. It's pure nonsense. Because once the borderline or the narcissist discards you or realizes that you're not going to give them what they want, they instantly forget about you. And they don't ever go through that stage of I lost the one. That never happens with them. So point being is that you aren't this passive victim of this confident narcissist leader. You are a narcissistic person. You don't have NPD, but you are very narcissistic when you are seeking to fix the unfixable. Because you were told as a kid that your lovability comes from meeting other people's emotional requirements, not for who you are. We don't give a crap who you are. We want you to fix us. If you can fix us and do what we want when we want, then we will love you. That was the message you got, which is why it's not that you can't avoid them. You seek them out because you have a narcissistic supply need. Healthy people don't give you that because a healthy person will say, you know what, I like you for who you are. You're a good person. And then when you try and fix them, they go, hey man, back off. I don't need you constantly in my face telling me what to do and how to do things. I'm perfectly okay. Let's go watch a movie together and tell me about your life. That's boring. You don't want that. You want somebody who's crazy, who's so broken that they need you. You need to be needed for what you do. That is narcissistic supply. It is manipulative because your goal in fixing them is to become indispensable so that they will love you and only you. Your narcissistic codependent fantasy is that they are a puppy or a kitten. Let me give you an example. I can tell by looking at somebody, and I know it sounds grandiose of me, but I can tell by looking at somebody, especially listening to them talk, I can tell almost immediately if they're a narcissist or if they're a borderline or if they're codependent. And for instance, Jada Pinkett Smith, narcissist. I'm not attracted to narcissists because their lack of vulnerability I don't like. It bothers me. It angers me. It frightens me because I had a narcissistic brother. My brother, I believe, was NPD. So I know that. My mom, however, had borderline tendencies. So, being the heterosexual man, I'm attracted to things that remind me of my mother. So, Jada Pinkett Smith has always bothered me, and I've always felt that there was this firewall. I don't like her acting, all of that, even long before I heard about her in the Will Smith thing. And when all this stuff came out, I went, of course, that makes sense. She's a narcissist. Borderlines, Amber Heard. I listen to Amber Heard talk, and I'm crazy in love because she's a borderline. So the borderline gives off this feeling of this broken puppy, this broken kitten. And if you know anything about cats and dogs, the moment that you meet any of their needs, they become completely dependent on you. They love you no matter what. If you take your spouse and your dog and you lock them in the trunk of your car for an hour, when you come back, the only person who's going to be happy to see you is your dog. Because your dog loves you unconditionally. Your dog needs you. Your dog is bonded to you. You will always be the perfect person for them. And that's what you're looking for in a partner. The borderline for me is that perfect, toxic thing, because I see in their big, shiny, cute little eyeballs that they're needy, and they give off the feeling that if you just love me, I will be your lapdog and I will be with you forever and I'll never leave you and I'll always love you and I'll always look up at you like that with big shiny eyes. And that's my narcissistic supply. I want to be that perfect person that if I can, with my love, if I can pour my love onto you, that you will finally feel that I'm the only being in the world that truly sees you and truly loves you, and you will be addicted to me for the rest of your life. And if you're addicted to borderlines, same thing. Now, narcissists, it's probably the same deal. They give off, but maybe what you needed is your narcissistic dad's approval. You finally to get things right. If you can finally do things exactly the way that I want, that feeds my ego, then I will love you. Either way, it's manipulative. You are trying to manipulate a broken, abusive, but broken person to love you unconditionally. So this is the main thing I don't like about what Rosenberg is saying here. He's saying that if you are the codependent, you are the passive victim. It also stigmatizes borderlines and narcissists because he portrays them as being confident. And they are not. That is your experience. That is the lie that they want you to, the narcissist, the NPD, they want to give off that they have no vulnerability, there's nothing wrong with them, and they have no pain, they have no insecurity, because in their mind, if you see their insecurity, it'll kill them because they are codependent. They need your narcissistic supply. They need you to see them as these perfect, confident, godlike beings. That is their codependence. They are dependent on your opinion of them. And if you don't buy into their unrealistic narcissistic fantasy of their perfect godhood, then they will be furious. And they want you if you can give them that narcissistic supply. Of course, it's impossible to meet that perfect standard. So again, they will get furious and angry, and they become abusive and cruel and all of that. And you are attracted to that because your parents did that to you, and that means there's still hope. As long as he's abusing me, there's still hope. I can finally get him to love me. But you are just as narcissistic. It is a dance. It's a dance of narcissistic supply. Your supply, and look at him. Forgive me, but look at him. Look at him. He looks like a victim. I'm looking in his eyes and I don't see that he has that recovery. That might be a superficial judgment on my part. Like I said, I can tell by looking at somebody. I can tell by looking at them if they have recovery. I can tell if they're a codependent. I can tell if they're a borderline. I can tell if they're a narcissist. At least I have that belief that I can, and I'm usually right. I think that this is his projection of his unresolved, lack of being, finding recovery. And he's a psychotherapist, so he's projecting his unrealized lack of recovery. He's projecting it onto his book. And as I said, he's throwing out nothing but assumptions here. And if you don't buy his assumptions, then his conclusions also don't land either. Anyway, let's keep going.
When their passive style is paired up with a partner whose dance style is controlling and self-confident, the dance sizzles with excitement.
See that? So my experience of narcissists is that they're the least confident. This is your transference onto them. If you had a narcissistic parent, you experience them as being confident and in control. And so you need to have that. So you're transferring it onto them. Sometimes they do come off very confident and very in control, but the truth is that they're not. They are, and I see it. I see it in narcissists. I can see their lack of confidence. But if you have this need to see your narcissistic abuser, if you have this need to be a passive, experience yourself as this passive, abusive victim to somebody that has all this power and control, that's what you're going to see. But it's an assumption, and I don't believe it to be true.
At least in the beginning. After many songs, what was once mesmerizing and exciting will usually transform into a dance that is defined more by drama, conflict, and feelings of being trapped. Whether the two are mesmerized or infuriated with each other, the compulsion to dance with the partner continues.
Okay, here we're going to...
Neither wants to sit the dance out. When a codependent and narcissist come together in a relationship, their dance unfolds flawlessly. The narcissistic partner maintains the lead and the codependent follows.
Again, that is pure presumption. That's an assumption. The codependent is also dictating what happens. As I said, you have an active agenda, which may even be to, this may be just his personal take on it, because I don't relate to this. I'm not a passive person at all. So, and I've been in a horrific relationship with an abusive, psychopathic borderline. But my experience was never that I was just this passive person. I think this is his thing. And again, he's projecting it on all codependents. So all codependents are these passive. And again, that's not the case. You have an active agenda. Your active agenda is to look for how you can be the perfect fixer. It's not just passive, it's active. You are looking for how you can fix them. If the dynamic is that your narcissist wants you to be a doormat, then you will actively seek to be that. It's not just something that happens to you like the weather.
Because the codependent gives up their power, the dance is perfectly coordinated. No one gets their toes stepped on. Typically, the codependent gives of themselves much more than their partners. As a generous but bitter partner, they seem to be stuck on the dance floor, always waiting for the next.
Again, that is an assumption as well. And codependence is narcissistic. You're not always lovingly giving. You give, it is, let me explain this to you. To give to somebody with no boundaries is not giving unconditionally. Unconditional love. He's saying that the codependent loves unconditionally, and they don't. Unconditional love means that here, I'm going to give this to you, and I don't need anything back from you. And you can take it, you can throw it away, you can keep it. I hope it helps you, but here's this gift. Enjoy it. And then you never think about it again. You don't have any attachment to what you get out of it. Codependents don't do that. They get involved romantically because they want to be loved. Otherwise, as he says, they wouldn't get bitter. They wouldn't get sad. They wouldn't feel all of these, not feeling loved, feeling neglected. All of those feelings come as a result of having an agenda. And there's nothing wrong with having an agenda. But this idea that codependents don't have an agenda and they are selflessly giving isn't true. You throw your boundaries away as a way of trying, again, it's a way of making yourself indispensable to the narcissist or the borderline so that they will have to love you. And once they do, you will own them. It is controlling. Anybody who's practiced jujitsu, I know very little about it, but I do know the last thing you want is to be on the ground on top of a master jujitsu player. They will bring you to the ground and then they will seemingly give you dominance, and then they will control you. And then you'll end up being stuck in them. So I guarantee you, every time that the super empath gives of themselves unreservedly, they may consciously feel they're doing it unconsciously, but they may consciously feel that they are doing it, without any expectations, unconditionally. But if it were really unconditional, you wouldn't be hurt by it. And if you're hurt by it, it means that you wanted something, that there was a price. I am giving you this, but there's a price. And I give the example of the codependent housewife that goes to the PTA meetings. And I've made this example before, a fictional example. So imagine, all the parents go to the PTA meetings, and there's one. Her name is Myrtle. And Myrtle shows up, and she brings cookies. And so everybody shows up and she brings a plate of cookies and puts them down, and everybody's talking, and they grab the cookies and everybody eats the cookies, and the cookies are all gone, and nobody said anything to Myrtle. Nobody said who brought the cookies. Nobody said thank you, Myrtle. So Myrtle is hurt. She went out of her way to buy those great chocolate chip cookies. That's one of her favorites, and she's going to ingratiate herself to these people and get their love and approval by being the good, I'm going to bring the cookies. And nobody mentioned her. So she says, okay, what I'm going to do next time is I'm going to get them direct from the bakery. I'm going to go to the bakery. I'm not going to just go to the store, get store-bought cookies. I'm going to get them from the bakery. So on the way to the PTA meeting, she goes in just before the bakery closes, as they're bringing out the last warm chocolate chip cookies, with the cinnamon spice, and they're so good. And so she gets them, boxes them up. They're still warm when she comes rushing in just a few minutes before and lays them out, and everybody comes in and they're talking, wow, these are great cookies, and they eat the cookies, and the cookies are all gone, and nobody asks who brought the cookies. And nobody says anything to Myrtle about, these are the great, thank you. What would we do without you, Myrtle? Nobody says that. Myrtle is now really scared and hurt. So what she does this time is she's going to bake them herself. So she goes and gets the cookie dough and she bakes them herself, and she times it perfectly so that when she shows up, the chocolate is still melted. When people show up and they're, oh my God, these cookies get better and better, and they're eating the cookies, nobody says anything. Nobody says anything to Myrtle. They just assume, there's cookies here. Oh, why do I go to the PTA meetings? Because they got cookies. I love the cookies. Nobody says anything about Myrtle. This time Myrtle says, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do so well that somebody's going to have to ask who brought these cookies. I'm going to make cookies from scratch. So she spends all week on the internet practicing, and she learns how to make this special chocolate chip cookie that is better than anything anybody's ever made. And she's so proud. She now knows that somebody's going to say something. She gets there a little bit late, and people are saying, where's the cookies? She puts the cookies down. People finally see Myrtle brought the cookies, and she puts the cookies down. And everybody eats Myrtle's cookies, and nobody says anything. And then finally, she says, that's it. I've had it. She comes to the next group, and she's there 20 minutes early, and she's there tapping her foot, and people walk in, and people are looking for the cookies. Where's the cookies? And they go, hey, Myrtle, didn't you bring the cookies last time? Yes, I did. Well, how come you didn't bring any this time? Well, I don't ask for much, but whenever you hear that, I mean, there are people I know codependents who have that phrase and they use it and they pull it out whenever they want to, and they will say, I don't ask for much. My mom used to say that. I don't ask for much, but I deserve something. That's because the whole reason she was bringing the cookies was she wanted people to tell her what a perfect PTA person you are. And oh my God, your dress is perfect and these cookies are amazing. What would we do without you? That is her narcissistic supply. And this is what you do when you become this passive, perfect dance partner. If that's your role, as he puts it, and again, that's not all codependents. Not all codependents are passive. I'm not. You're this passive, perfect, submissive dance partner. That is your game that you play so you can be the perfect person, so you can be loved. To his credit, he changes. At some point, later on, he evolves into changing the word codependence into, I think, self-love deficit disorder. So he doesn't like the word, like most untreated codependents, he doesn't like the word codependent because he doesn't like the word dependent. So he calls it self-love deficit disorder, except that describes the borderline and the narcissist also. They also suffer from self-love deficit. Here's the thing that also bothers me. This is pop psychology, and in my take, there's no real recovery here. This isn't a guy who is a psychologist who wrote a book by looking at studies. You never hear him say, and I looked at the studies and I looked at this. He says, I had this experience with my clients. I tried to tell them this. I came up with this. And this whole thing, we haven't even got through it yet. This whole essay is him introducing these blanket, superficial assumptions. And he hasn't shown any research to back up any of these assumptions. He hasn't shown any, I haven't heard him yet say how successful he is at helping people be treated and cured, as he claims to cure people. I haven't heard him say that. What I hear is a very palatable, tasty, comforting assumption that feeds into the already narcissistic projection that codependents have, which is, I just love everybody. I'm a super empath and I love unconditionally. That's my thing. And there are either people who give and people who take. And I don't take. All I do is give. And I don't ask for much. But when I do, that's what I'm hearing. And that's why it's so freaking popular. Because there's no responsibility. Self-love deficit disorder. First, let's talk about that. This guy's a psychologist. He should know the difference between a disorder and a neurosis. A disorder, we're talking about somebody who has a mental illness. So without realizing it, he has turned codependence into a mental illness disorder, which it is not. People with borderline personality disorder, they suffer from severe mental illness. They dissociate. So they can't tolerate their feelings. They dissociate. They disconnect. They no longer connect or identify with their own feelings. They have lapses of memory. They don't have an identity, which is really important. You have to understand that. If you're with a borderline, that borderline, when they wake up the next day, they do not identify with the things that they did and said the day before. That is a mental illness. They are not connected to objective reality. They don't have a past, a present that leads into a future. They have a continuously shifting self-state present, which means they shift into different self-states of being. That happens with somebody who doesn't have an identity. In fact, Ross talks about, his strategy for dealing with narcissistic abuse, this thing about absorbing and not taking it on and not fighting back. He doesn't say anything about just getting out of the room and not having anything to do with these people ever again. He creates this codependent method of staying with a narcissist. At least that's the way I heard it. And he even says that he came up with, because he was in a relationship with a borderline for years, and he came up with a strategy. This is him talking now. He came up with a strategy to dissociate from what was happening so that he didn't have to take it on. And that is almost a disordered state. I mean, he's trying to turn himself into a borderline. That's what borderlines do. When it gets too intense, and borderlines have suffered abuse and they constantly seek out narcissists. I mean, literally the state between codependent and borderline is very thin. And if you continue on in your codependence, you take on borderline traits. And one of them is dissociating. That is not a healthy thing to do. This is a therapist talking about he came up with a strategy to disassociate from his feelings in an abusive situation. And what you should do, in my opinion, take it for what it is that when you are being abused and you can't turn around and walk out the door, you say, hey, I'm not going to participate in this with you. You don't get to do this to me. At least having that, staying associated with the feelings of being abused. Anyway, that's how I see it. So I have to say, this guy's a therapist, but this is a huge blunder for a psychologist to take a neurosis, which is a codependent is a state of neurosis, not a state of psychosis. To take a neurotic state and call it a disorder. This guy, he may have the degrees behind him. He may have gone to school and gotten a degree, but that doesn't mean he knows anything about psychology. And just because, even if he, there are other psychologists I could quote whom I reference who also don't know the first thing about recovery. They know a lot about mental illness, but they don't know the first thing about recovery. So I'm just telling you the truth. This guy, I think the recovery that he offers is at best incomplete. And I think it's even potentially destructive, because if you keep telling yourself that you are this passive victim and that narcissists are these confident, in control people who can take or leave you, because that's the other feeling he gives, is that, narcissists can take or leave you. They're not. They're as addicted to you as you are to them. The discard that they have is actually associated with their addiction to you, not from their confident, ability to push you aside. All right, let's keep going.
Song, at which time their partner will finally understand their needs. The codependent pretends to enjoy the dance, but really feels anger, bitterness, sadness, and loneliness for not taking an active role in the dancing experience. When given a chance to stop dancing with the narcissistic partner, or comfortably sit out the dance until someone healthy comes along, they typically choose to continue their dysfunctional dance. The codependent dares not to leave the narcissistic dance partner, for they lack self-esteem and a sense of self-worth to sit the dance out.
That's true, but he's victimizing them. They dare not leave because they don't know if they'll find anything better. The truth is, they dare not leave because they are so attached to their narcissistic supply, the hope that someday they will become the perfect person. It's not like there are healthy people walking around and they would go with the healthy people, but they just can't leave the narcissist. If you give the codependent the choice, if you were to do that, if you had the ability to give them the choice, that they could be with this healthy person that would see them for who they are, love them for who they are, or to go with the broken person that maybe someday you could fix and then become their, ultimate love fix for the rest of their lives. The codependent will always pick the hope that I can get this damaged person to love me because it's too boring. There's no narcissistic supply. In fact, it's threatening. There's nothing more frightening to a codependent than to truly be seen for who they are. And I know this from experience. When somebody actually loves you for who you are, it's incredibly frightening. It's the same experience that the borderline has. So again, this is an assumption. And again, the way he's painting the picture, as a therapist, he's just co-signing his client's victim mentality. He's not urging them to take any responsibility other than that they have self-love deficit disorder, as though the narcissist is full of self-love, which is absolutely 100% not true. The self-love that the narcissist tries to portray is fake. It's absolutely fake. And that is your job, is to keep that facade going. That is your role as the codependent with the narcissist. Your role with the borderline is to co-sign that they're a broken victim and nobody can love them but you. Either way, you have this narcissistic agenda to be seen as the perfect person. And there's narcissistic manipulative supply associated with it.
Being alone is equivalent to feeling lonely, and loneliness is too painful of a feeling to bear. No matter how often the codependent tries to avoid unhealthy partners, they find themselves consistently on the dance floor, mesmerized by different songs, but with the same partner. This dance process is a reciprocal dance. It's a dance that requires two people who are actively involved to meet each other's needs. The narcissist or the emotional manipulator takes charge or leads the dance, but in doing so, he or she is over-focused or self-absorbed. They need to feel needed. They need to feel special.
So he's saying that the codependent is not self-obsessed and doesn't need to be focused on. Remember Myrtle. Myrtle, the codependent, needed to be seen as the perfect person at the PTA meeting. Again, this is an assumption. He's not backing this up with anything other than, as he said, I thought about, bear in mind, basically what he's saying is that he was an incompetent therapist. Forgive me for saying so. I had all of these clients, and no matter the fact that they were with me in therapy, they kept going back to these abusive people. And I kept on wondering, why do they do that? Not what is wrong with my therapeutic approach that nobody seems to get any recovery. But again, do you see the assumption that's being shoved down your throat? And do you feel how comforting it is to hear that, yes, they take control. They're the ones that need constant attention. I don't need anything from them. I just don't want to be alone.
They need to feel valued, and they seek partners that submit to their desires.
So do codependents. Their desire is to be the perfect healer, and they seek broken, desperately insecure borderlines and narcissists who will fall into the category of I'm going to fix you. Because healthy people will go, man, will you stop? Will you stop giving me unsolicited advice? Will you stop trying to fix me? Stop asking me how I'm feeling every 10 seconds. Stop it. It's codependent. Amber Heard, borderline. Johnny Depp talks about the first red flag that went off in his mind was that he would come home every day from work and she would take his boots off and give him a glass of wine. At first he's like, this is great. She's on the phone one day. He takes the boots off himself. She comes in and she says, what are you doing? What do you mean? You took your boots off. Well, yeah. That's not your job. That's my job. I do that. Meaning, I get my narcissistic supply from the fantasy that I treat you better than anybody. If you take care of yourself, if you are self-sufficient, it means you don't need me. And if you don't need me, it means you're going to leave me. That is codependence. She's a borderline, so she feels it very intensely, but codependents are exactly the same. It's not that the narcissist becomes he suddenly turns into this, this confident, needy, I just constantly need attention, and you go, oh my God, I'm trying to meet your needs. No, it's like you are seeking that out, because if you were with a normal person, it would at the least bore you, and at most it would frighten the hell out of you, because then you wouldn't get any narcissistic supply. When somebody loves you for who you are, and they don't require you, nay, they don't want you to try and fix them, then you have no way of knowing whether you're loved or not. That's codependence. And so he's describing a codependent. The narcissist is also codependent.
These are individuals.
And this is projection, by the way. What he is saying about narcissists, I'm going to go so far as to say, this is his projection of himself. The fact that you see these narcissists as these in control, confident people who nothing bothers them, they can take or leave you, that is your projection as a codependent. You want to be that way. You want to be somebody who doesn't need anybody, and nothing bothers you, which is why he came up with, as he says in one of his other interviews, he says he came up with a strategy to deal with narcissistic abuse, which was to disassociate from it and then learn how to absorb it without fighting back. That is incredibly unhealthy. And it is narcissistic. It doesn't dawn on him to go, you know what? I'm just getting the hell out of here. I'm not having, this person is just abusive, and there's nothing I can do to please this person. So I'm done. I am out of here. See ya. No, he says, I figured out a strategy to interact with the narcissist, and instead of fighting back, I've learned to disassociate and take the abuse. And the narcissistic fantasy is that you're not being damaged by them. That you have this ability to stay in the relationship, stay in the room with them, take their abuse and not have it damage you. That is, that's again, we're bordering on a borderline behavior. But it's in somebody who doesn't have an actual personality disorder. So it's a very neurotic, and it's a selfish, it's manipulation. Because if you truly love somebody, meaning you love them unconditionally, you don't co-sign their bullshit.
Have a narcissistic quality to their personality. And we will talk a little bit later about exactly what is narcissism, both as a psychological concept and a personality disorder. Codependence, or the passive dance member, is absorbed with the dance. They're absorbed with meeting the needs of others, absorbed with making people happy. They require a partner to take care of. They feel special and needed through submission. So these two dance partners find the dance is exciting and exhilarating, even though the codependent doesn't quite always feel like she or he's getting what they want. It is an enduring dance pattern, or it's an enduring relationship pattern that, despite consequences, continues.
All right. So there you go. All right. So there's not much more to be said. So to answer your question, it's just a pop psychology book. Ross Rosenberg seems to be, as I said, he seems to be sincere, but as I said, even though he's a psychologist, he is coming from his own experience. He's not quoting or researching any, psychological statistics or understanding. He doesn't quote any other psychologists or psychiatrists. So even though he's a psychologist, this is just, it's really no different than me in that I'm sharing with you all of my thoughts and experiences based on my experience, and I'm not a psychologist. He, even though he has a degree, it doesn't mean that anything he's saying is coming from any real psychological proven methods or understandings or statistics. Everything he says is pure assumption, which in my opinion is based on his projection. And if he doesn't have any self-awareness, like he has minimal awareness, at the very end he says that the codependent, they need to be loved and they need to be seen as the giver and the healer, but he couches it in a way of those poor, stupid victims. And he doesn't have any awareness that he is also manipulative in his seeking to be the perfect giver. He doesn't have any awareness of the the narcissistic supply that codependents get from being perfect givers, and he doesn't realize how abusive it is. The reason why codependents seek out abusive people is because abusive people don't have boundaries. They don't respect your boundaries, and they also don't have any boundaries, which means that you have the option, depending on the mood of the borderline or the narcissist, you have the option to go in, give them unsolicited advice, demand that I be the one that takes your boots off, whatever it is. And a healthy person says, no, I'm perfectly capable of taking my boots off. I don't need you for that. Come here and tell me how your day was. Can I get you a glass of wine? So I don't see any awareness. I don't see any real recovery. He has this tenfold recovery process, which I've glanced at and listened to him talk about, but he goes into at some point and he insists on that he can cure you. So he talks about codependence. He doesn't really know what codependence is. He says that there's no real, which is true, there's no real consensus on what codependence is. But he doesn't understand that codependence is something that is we can call it a syndrome, we can call it a dynamic. It's a dynamic that never goes away. The borderline never gets free of their disorder. They never stop splitting. At best, if a borderline gets real help, the best that they can achieve is to learn to tolerate their symptoms and act opposite to their impulses, their destructive impulses. Codependent can heal, but they'll never be completely free of their codependent tendencies. He, like many codependents, he doesn't like the word codependence because he doesn't like the word dependence, because that's actually his issue. He's dependent as a codependent. He's dependent on the narcissistic abuser. He's dependent on that dynamic because, as he says, that's where he gets his worth. We all do, all of us codependents. When we're in it, that's where we get our value, we get our worth. But the whole point of therapy is to become individuated. He seems to understand this, and he talks about, overcoming self-love deficit disorder, he calls it, because he wants to call it that instead of codependence, because he doesn't like the stigma associated with the term dependent. But this is typical. I see it on this channel all the time. People don't like the word codependent. They don't want to be codependent. They want to talk about the abuse. He's just finding he's a very smart guy, a very powerful intellect, and he's using his intellect to distance himself from his own pain, and he's not taking any real responsibility. Perhaps he doesn't have any real awareness of the true narcissistic, selfish, abusive, manipulative nature that is the core of codependence. Because it's a spectrum. You're either the non-disordered, Myrtle codependent, or you have a personality disorder, which means that there's nobody home, things are off kilter upstairs, you don't have an objective understanding of reality, you go in and out of reality, you can't tell the difference between your fantasy and objective reality. You don't have an identity. You forget who you are. That's the natural progression of codependence. It's not two sides of a spectrum. Two sides of opposites. It's a spectrum. If your codependence got any worse, you'd become a borderline. And they say borderlines are failed narcissists. So a borderline is the infant that vacillates between the infantile need for love and affection and the psychopathic, narcissistic, abusive defender who defends the helpless little infant. That's what you get when you get a borderline. And that is because the borderline at some point tried to become a full-fledged psychopath, to be this impervious, as he puts it, confident, controlling person. They tried to do that and they failed. And this is what happens. This is the cycle. When they split, they go into the narcissistic psychopath, which is nothing bothers me. I'm going to destroy you before you destroy me. I am impervious to pain. I don't care about you. I have no empathy. You don't exist. And they vacillate between that, and then they go through all kinds of guilt, and then, no, I need you. You're the one. You're the only one that ever loved me. You're perfect. I'm sorry. I promise it'll be okay. They become the perfect codependent. And then the narcissist is somebody who actually successfully achieved that self state where they portray this fantasy of being this godlike, perfect, impervious person, and your job is to support that. And if you don't support that, then I can't have you in my life. I will destroy you if you don't support my fantasy. And of course, they end up destroying everybody because nobody can perfectly hold up that unrealistic, perfect fantasy that the narcissist has. Do you see how they're all connected? So the least damaged one means that you don't have a personality disorder, is what he refers to as the self-love deficit disordered person. But that's the truth of all of them. The borderline has actually gone one step further. They've gone over the line into psychosis. They suffer from severe dissociation. They don't have an identity. They don't relate to you. They vacillate between psychopathy and extreme codependence. And then you have somebody who actually perfects the defense mechanism, and they become so impervious that they have no empathy. They are potentially psychopathic and destructive, and it's just a spectrum. He is on the bottom end of the spectrum. He's a codependent, and his fantasy is that I'm a helpless victim. I just love people unconditionally. I just passively go along with the abuse. In fact, I so passively go along with the abuse that I've learned a method that I've written books about it. I teach my clients how to emotionally dissociate when they're being abused. And then I make it sound like I'm the self-righteous, I'm like a Aikido master, and I just absorb their abuse and I don't buy into it. Instead of staying aware of the feelings that come up and acting appropriately on them, which is to completely sever all contact. Okay? So, short answer to your question, what do I think of the human magnet syndrome? I think that it is, at best, incomplete. It doesn't give complete recovery. And at worst, it is the super empath, the new age super empath model, but in the words of somebody who's a therapist. So there's my answer to your question. If you want real lasting healing from the pain of the relationship, I only know of one way to do it, and that is to do the 4 things. Go complete no contact, make it impossible for them to contact you. Number 2, work all 12 steps with a sponsor, especially step 4. Look at your part in your expectations, your resentments, how you created the pain within yourself based on your selfish, self-centered expectations. And then number 3 is work with a psychologist. And, Ross is a perfectly good psychologist. I'm sure he can help you look at why your mom this and how you projected your mom on him. And now you put that in with your steps, you'll be golden. And then number 4 is have some kind of daily meditation, which is really just step 11. First two, thing 1 and thing 2 are non-negotiable. You don't do that, in my experience. If you've been damaged by a borderline, you've been infected, and there's a very good chance that you will never completely recover unless you do those first 2 things. That's it for me. I wish you guys all the best. I will see you all next time.